Hey friends, thanks for taking time to listen in on a conversation Dick and I had with Terence Dove. During winter break, Dick and I had the opportunity to speak with Terence Dove, a highly respected karting coach who works with a full range of kart drivers, including various national and world championship winning drivers. As you'll hear, Terence is most interested in helping drivers use the world of karting and motor racing to become great people. This means that the colossal unfairness, danger, constant failure, and financial impossibility of motor racing are all totally necessary in that pursuit. He believes that karting is where drivers first get hit by these challenges, so karting is where it's at for him. Our conversation touches on many esoteric concepts that as fans it's easy to miss. I was grateful that Terence shared so candidly and highlighted elements of motorsport that often get overlooked. But before we get to our conversation, I need to ask, can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. Hope you enjoy our conversation. All right, Dick, we did an interview recently. I don't know where this will air in the sequence, but I'm really excited because I feel like we're getting a duo from 2 brothers, and we got to do the conversation separately so they both get the full weight of their time. And I'm super excited for this person. What about you?
I am very excited because I've read his book, which is called Learn How to Master the Art of Kart Driving. Got it here on the bookshelf. Read it on a flight across the country. Wonderful book. And so now we get to talk with Terence and get his side of the story. So I'm super excited to welcome him with us today. And I think this is going to be a really fun conversation.
Terence, would you like to say hello?
Yeah, hi. And I'm really pleased to be here. This is cool.
I think that would be great if you could tell our audience a little bit about your motorsport background so they have some frame of reference.
Yeah, it's pretty simple. All I do is I coach kart drivers, and my background in the sport is I started karting when I was 11, just with my dad. We did it on a local level. I only did it for a few years, and we went through like a very basic, we didn't really know what we were doing. But I did okay as a driver, and I learned some stuff, and then I went to university. Did my time at university doing automotive engineering, and got bored of that, got away, started a business, got bored of that, and one day went back to a kart track, feeling a bit lost with life, being a bit kind of normal. And I saw a driver called Ben Cruttenden, who I think now runs a big kart team in the USA. I think that's Bennick. But anyway, he was, this is in 2003, I think. And he put out like a hit move on someone. It was completely outrageous, but I saw it happen. And I thought, wow, I've got to, this is where I belong. I've got to get back into this. And I just did some advertising, wrote down what I knew about driving, what I'd learned, and people started hiring me. And really, I don't know what I'm going to be doing 2 weeks from now. And as long as the phone keeps ringing, people asking me to come to tracks, I'll carry on. And that's how it's been for 20 years. So yeah, I've got a Substack now where I put all my information out. I've got the book, and that's it.
I'm curious. There's a gentleman named Jeff Braun who's a race engineer here in the States. His son is Colin Braun. He's won a lot of sports car races in IMSA primarily, but Jeff has won like the 12 Hours of Sebring and the Rolex 24 and all these. I mean, he's got quite the resume. And he told me that when he wrote his book on race engineering a racing car, he sold a good number of copies, thousands, but he's not huge, but it was a good number. But he said what that really was his calling card. Are you finding that to be the same with your book?
No, the book's done well, and maybe it's too good because it didn't increase the number of people who actually contacted me directly. I think they just took the book and improved, and maybe that was enough. People do certainly contact me from the book, but I didn't increase the number of coaching gigs that I got from the book.
Interesting.
Yeah, it's a bit weird because that's what you hear in the business world is the best business card you can give is a book because that establishes you. But like, I do have a problem with marketing. One of my drivers, his dad recently said to me that I'm sorry, but I'm not going to recommend you to anyone.
Nice.
Because especially within the series that we compete in, because I don't want people learning what we've learned. That's racing, isn't it? It's like a very different to normal business.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm probably a bit of a best kept secret for a lot of people. And a lot of people I work with do ask me not to let on that I've worked with them and stuff like that. So it's a bit odd. I mean, with the book, to be honest, when I wrote the book, the motivation was I'm tired of telling drivers the same stuff over and over. So I'm going to download it all into one document. effectively. And once drivers have this, I can move on and start getting into the more important parts, what I think is important with working with drivers. And in theory, they should know the stuff I've written down. Of course, that doesn't work either because they buy it, they skim through it, and then they contact me, and then I do find myself telling them the same stuff that's in the book. But that was really, it was supposed to be like closing the door on just technique, because that's what the majority of it is, and starting to work on how a driver approaches mentally, really, what driving is, what it's for, and how to get something out of it other than just being a fast driver. There's a lot more to get out of being in motorsport than being a driver. There's not many good examples of that. So that's another reason for doing the book. I wanted to get the first part of the book is about that. And I don't think there's that many representatives in the motorsport world where they're not just racing drivers. I think they should move on, really. Beat Elon Musk to Mars or something. It's don't just be a racing driver. Use racing as like a crucible to become like a great person, and use it to stay sharp and do big things. Lots of racing drivers are effectively very expensive hobbies for other people, if that makes sense.
Yep.
And I don't think that's worthy. In my own mind, I've elevated racing drivers to like as modern knights of the realm. It's like that,
Right.
like a noble class of people, because of what racing is. It's extremely tough. It takes a whole person. It takes every aspect of a person if you're going to do it properly. So I don't like to see that racing drivers are just dependent on a wealthy backer and they drive and nothing else. I think they should be their own backer. I think they should go into the world and bring in the support, the funding, do the whole thing themselves. That's really what I'm trying to help drivers do now.
It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's a bit tougher than just teaching them how to brake.
So, by any chance, do you know Martin Stone?
Now, that name rings a bell, but I don't know why.
So Martin was Lando Norris's tuner when Lando won the junior karting world championship. And he lives here in Dallas now. And he and his wife have opened up 3 or 4 businesses. I mean, they're doing quite well. But Martin is still in a position where pretty much every weekend you can count on him going out and pounding out 200, 250 laps every single weekend and running in big races and really, really executing well. I mean, I have so much respect for what he's doing because he's, mid to late 30s now, I'm guessing. But, he's got 2 young kids and all that kind of stuff. And I think you can see the kind of job he's doing as a dad by the response of his 2 kids who clearly adore the man.
That sounds cool.
Great guy.
Well, so I wanted to unpack something that you said a few seconds ago about the skills that you're hoping to impart and that it makes them better human beings. Do you think that that's harder now in the current generation of people that you're working with? Do people see that as just as beneficial as developing their racecraft skills?
It's a tough sell, but people do understand there's something wrong with the concept that there's a ladder and that it's real. So it's a little bit like believing in Father Christmas, that if you go to a kart track and do well and drive really well and spend lots of money to get to the front, that there's someone there looking for you. And that person one day will give you a call and say, we know you haven't won any national titles, but we've been keeping an eye out for you and I'm a talent scout and we want that. Doesn't actually happen. And when you tell a driver that's not real, they kind of, because they don't want that to be true, they'll reject it normally. And families, even though they do understand that's true. So it's a bit like they want Father Christmas to be a true thing, right? And people don't like to tell their kids that, so they kind of get it. So what I'm trying to do a lot of the time is to say, if you're looking for that route, you're missing the whole point of doing racing in the first place, where it's a good reason to go out and develop yourself as really an entrepreneur. But the resistance to that is drivers feel like, and the reason I know this because I was a young driver who thought the world was supposed to come and say, you're talented, we're going to make things happen. If you go out and find your own backing, it feels like you're admitting that you haven't got the talent to be picked up as a raw talent. That's how they feel. So there's a big disincentive to go out and find your own sponsors. And I think that's the biggest block. I believe a racing driver actually comes ready with a lot of the stuff you need to go out, be brave and cold call someone, bang the door of a local business. They generally won't do it because I think they feel like that is invalidating their own value as a talented driver rather than a go-getter. And I think they do frown upon it. I think they look at other drivers who are saying, I've got sponsors, and they're kind of a bit, well, you need sponsors because you're not going to get picked up because you're not good enough. So it's like, that's a hard sell, but I believe in it because I'm trying to show drivers there's more to being a driver than driving, and there's more applications to what you learn from driving than just driving. And I think it can put people into a different, they can transcend being a normal everyday person. But unfortunately, they generally don't. So yeah, it's a bit of a mission impossible, but that's what I want to do. If I didn't have that realization of wanting to do that, I think I would have quit. I think I would have done something different.
You know, for every 10 drivers you bump up against, 9 of them don't want to listen to you, but that one that will listen to you, that makes it worthwhile for the rest of it, because the other 9 are going to frustrate you forever.
Yeah. However, I'm a contrarian, and I do relate to drivers who are kind of uncoachable because I'm uncoachable. So there's always especially if you're into sports, coaches like their students to be coachable, and that's like a virtue.
Right.
However, with drivers, some of the best ones I work with and have worked with are a complete nightmare to deal with. They're literally a nightmare. But if you understand that, and you understand you have to work with them rather than on them, then you can develop quite a good relationship, which is why a lot of I had to look into other approaches, because it became, like you're saying, it became 9 out of 10 wouldn't. They're just like stone cold, unresponsive. I'm there hired. Sometimes they are paying me to be there. And then they immediately shut down when I start giving advice. So I had to study different approaches, and it took me into actual psychotherapy. It was... That's severe. So, yeah, that's why I talk about Carl Rogers, who is a super groovy, seemed very inappropriate for racing driver type guy, because he's kind of about human peace, love, humanistic stuff. But if you actually get into the nuts and bolts of it, it makes sense that there's certain ways of dealing with drivers that are very helpful, because drivers do not want to know. Generally, they don't want to be helped. A lot of really good drivers don't want any input at all. So the approach this guy had with really difficult people who are mentally kind of really in trouble, it was useful with racing drivers, because you're flipping it. So you're getting them to talk. If you can just get them to talk, one thing that drivers are not used to at all is people listening to them, because everybody at a racetrack, almost everybody at a racetrack, is quite a big ego. They don't want to listen. So if you listen to a driver and you carry on listening when they know they're telling a load of nonsense to get away with things or to make excuses, you carry on listening. Eventually you kind of establish this idea that, wait, this guy's listening to me and making sense of what I'm saying, so there's no point me telling him stuff that's not accurate. Then things start to get better. Before we started, Sabrina was talking about teaching and having respect for students. It's a very I have a high degree of respect for anyone who goes racing or has ambition to go racing. Anyone who does sims, or I know people who can't race, they get it. They understand racing, understand drivers. They'd love to do it. And those people you can help, because you can start to say, well, look at your characteristics. This can apply to anything you do. And that does actually happen. They do go out and realize what kind of person they are. So that's part of listening to a race driver is if you relate to them and start to understand them, but you're also reflecting the idea that I respect you in particular because you've got a racing spirit. It's kind of a weird bias I have. I think racing drivers are a higher level of person. Therefore, I've got time for all of them. No matter what they're doing, if they're scared, they're backing out of situations that most people in racing have very little patience for. If you're out there facing fears and you go back out, even if you back down, if you keep going out, then you are a special kind of person, to my mind.
You know, Terence, I think that's really, really interesting because, you know, I laid out for, like I said, about 30 years, stepped back into a KZ, and I have grown more in the last 3 years than I probably did in the last at least 10 to 15. It's been remarkable what I've learned about myself and how I've developed as a person. And it's really funny. It's like my wife said, she goes, I can always tell when you've been at the racetrack because you're more like the guy I married than the guy I'd been living with for a long time. Isn't that interesting? And the wife knows you better, right? The wife knows you better than you do. So
she's saying that she misses the big brave hero.
Yeah,
she's got him back.
Even though I drove her crazy because, you know, a 20-year-old racing driver who's convinced that he's the next hot thing is just about bulletproof, right? Or at least he thinks he is. And I've got enough humility now because I've been knocked around by the life that doesn't happen. But on the other hand, there is a level of confidence that I did not have prior to getting back into it.
Right. Well, that's interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I thrive on the competition. I love it. I don't care if I'm racing for last. As long as I'm in a good battle, I'm good.
Yeah, I mean, it's a philosophical thing, really. That's probably where this leads. I think racing, driving, race car driving, and whatever. It's a philosophy of life, but I don't think drivers generally spend much time thinking about that. So I'll do that thinking for them, and if I can communicate to them that they do have a life philosophy, that's why they're attracted to this completely stupid activity. And I mean, it is ridiculous because it does take everything from you and it seems not to give anything back. And there's a lot of very, very disgruntled people in racing who have been hurt by it. It's quite, I mean, it can get really, really dark because they haven't seen the real meaning of it. So it feels like it just takes your money and it spits you out. That's probably the most common scenario. But if you understand all of that, including how it's taken all your money and how unfair it is and how, I don't know, maybe Lawrence Stroll can just buy a team, put his son in and have what we call lad and dad racing, like where that's what it is effectively, except it's Formula One with a typically disgruntled son as well. That's what you're competing against. So when you're like a normal family competing against that, it makes everything seem terrible. And I'm saying my perspective is, that's the best thing about it, because I want to help shape incredible, resilient, powerful people. I like to put them in the most ugly but exhilarating, magnificent activity there is. And I hesitate to call it a sport because it's a lot more than a sport. It's a life. It's kind of extreme life because it does destroy people. And that's what's great about it. And if you can get through it and take what it's got to offer in terms of self-development, because it's not like self-development where you can go and speak to kind of life coach person. It is horrible. It's more like a military scenario, except in the military, they at least give you the stuff. Like in racing, you've got to go and find the kit to do it. And then you find out it's not good enough. And then I say to drivers, I mean, it's horrible, really. They'll say, oh, my engine's not fast enough. And I'll say, whose fault's that? I won't put it in these terms. This is the message. Like, whose fault is that? And they'll say, well, my engine guy, he's giving someone else the engine. And I say, well, why aren't you getting that engine? They say, well, we can't afford that engine. Okay, but what? Well, enter some psychological warfare then. Let's go after that guy. And there's racing people are susceptible to you acting like a racing driver in everything you do and how you talk to them and how you try and manipulate them. Do everything. That stuff is so valuable when they do it and it works. So you can get the equipment if you haven't got the money, and you can get the money. But it seems so unfair. But we're talking about life, and there's nothing in life that there's no instruction manual and there's no real fairness, really. That's the value of it.
I agree.
But it's kind of ugly.
Oh, yeah.
Have I put you off yet, Sabrina? You start,
No,
you have
no,
several
no,
thoughts about getting into this business.
Not at all. I love it. There are so many elements. This is going in such a different direction than what I had originally planned, but I'm like so eating it up because it ties a lot of things that I think John, Dick, and I have talked about on previous episodes or even interviews with young drivers. I think because of your position inside of the landscape of motorsport, you've had a point of view that is developed and very seasoned, I guess is the best word. When you talked about how you coach your drivers, the image that came to my mind was the movie The Horse Whisperer. And I don't know if you've seen that movie before. Years ago. Have you seen it?
I haven't.
It came out probably in the late 90s. I can't remember if it was Harrison Ford in the lead or Robert Redford. But early in the story, we find out that a young girl was riding her horse, and as a result of a crash, both she and the horse are dealing with post-traumatic stress disorder. And the mother makes a decision to take the daughter and the horse to Montana to recover. And the way that the Horse Whisperer handles this trauma, both for the young girl and for the horse, was one of such respect as two different species, let alone the trauma that they went through. And it's just a beautiful story of recovery and restoration. So I was thinking about when someone comes to you, as you said, the paddock, the motorsport is filled with people of arrogance, where you're willing to listen, you're willing to do something that's not the typical, how that must bring down the stress levels for them so they can finally start to hear. Because the horse, especially, can't communicate. It's so angry. It's trying to deal with all of the emotions. But eventually, when it realizes that the horse whisperer understands and know they can never actually physically communicate, they can communicate because of the emotional connection that they make with one another. And I think that that's necessary, as you pointed out, like knights. I think it's a great analogy. I think that's part of the reason why I so respect people who are putting themselves into the position to race, is that just like the fan back in those days of knights would sit there and cheer them on. I know I'm not doing it, but you've got the resilience and strength and courage to go do that. And I think it's a fantastic analogy. And the third thing, when you said military, I literally had just written down, it is just like a military cultural shift in thinking that is required, where you have to basically break down the normative culture and build it into this extra culture. And you're going to have to be able to walk between the two, which we know from our military veterans is a very difficult challenge for them to have to walk through, because you have to turn on different sides of your personality. There are transcendent skills, but at the same token, nobody from either world can truly understand what you're going through in the other world. To me, I know this is a much more esoteric conversation that we're having right now, but I think that for fans, like for our podcast audience, that we're hoping are people who come through the door as a very novice Formula One fan to really understand there's so much more depth than just simply turning on the TV and watching a race, or even going to the track and cheering it on, to realize all that's going on behind the scenes, inside the industry, inside the individual racer, the team. So I think you've brought in so many different things. I hope our audience can see. I'm always an advocate of appreciating the people who are doing what they're doing. So I think you bring so much to the conversation.
There's
so
a
you
lot
haven't
in
put me off.
There's a yeah, it's right. So like the military link is interesting because veterans quite often have like post-traumatic disorders, which is probably not a disorder, is it? It's probably more post-traumatic order, because it's kind of
They're trying to reorder it. Yeah.
and they should be traumatized.
Right.
And then they have to fit into normal worlds. And it's a bit like where a driver, well, it's exactly like drivers are in a racing world where it is everything. So driving itself is everything to a driver. So when they have to communicate with normal people, they're like knights, but princes as well, where they like to have to talk to normal people is a little bit disdainful. So to have to lower yourself to speak to a normal person to try and get money from them, a knight would be looking to do a military campaign probably, and probably wants to just tax them. Right? He could say, right, we'll just tax these peasants and they'll have to pay for this. I think that's how drivers feel. So there is a big disconnect. Like that's like a soldier coming back from, you people just don't understand where I've just come back from. And they don't. It's not as bad for drivers, because a driver can learn to understand that people who are entrepreneurial, and they're the people they have to go and speak to, do relate to racing drivers, because entrepreneurs take risks and they do like drivers. So if drivers can understand that someone who runs a business is kind of cool as well, and they can support each other, I don't think drivers realise they've got a lot to offer. And so when you're a kart driver, you can approach small businesses who are generally run by someone who's taken a chance and not appreciated, having to pay a few staff, and the staff always feel hard done by, and but they're brave. They're putting a lot on the line quite often. And the driver is similar, and they do like drivers. They like young people coming in, being brave and saying, I'm a racing driver, back me. And the entrepreneur says, go away. You're not offering me anything. And they go away, and then they come back and they say, I'm a racing driver. I can help you advertise your business. And they say, no, you can't. Don't be stupid. Go away. And then the race driver comes back, showing persistence. Entrepreneurs like characteristics like that, and they're very vulnerable to it. And they start to really like drivers who keep coming back and keep trying. And entrepreneurs can kind of live off that, because they at some point they decide, I want to support this kid. Don't know why. I think lots of people who run businesses have got kids who are a little bit spoiled. And if you're a young driver and you approach someone who owns a business who's kind of looking at their own kids going, oh my God, they don't work for anything. They get everything on a plate. And then someone of an equivalent age is showing initiative and persistence and taking knockbacks and coming back positive, they kind of fall for them and they want to back them. And the value the entrepreneur gets is they feel like their business they're in quite often could be quite boring. They start to get demotivated, and then they're helping someone who's got characteristics that they say, well, when I was young, I was like that. I was a go-getter. I want to help this kid. They get a lot of motivation from that. Helps them push their own business harder. And then they're willing to do collaborations, knowing kind of really that advertising stickers on a go-kart aren't going to bring anything in, but it affects their life. life positively. But that's where drivers, like with the military thing, aren't connected. But the post-traumatic thing is the racing driver world, or the racing world, is kind of traumatic. It's a shock. So there is like trauma kind of approach where you're talking about the horse whisperer. Yeah, you have to kind of, I do a lot with parents trying to help them keep a perspective, because racing for parents who are trying to support their kid, it is kind of traumatizing, because they're seeing their son or daughter being beaten up by the reality, and they have a dream. So their kid has a dream, and there's nothing really in the sport that helps them, only drains them. And I'm trying to help keep the parents in whilst trying to help the driver take on more responsibility, which helps convince the parents to keep going with something where they say, what am I doing to my kid? Because this sport is ridiculous. So if you can imagine being a parent and you're dealing with adults who are making money, so it's serious, that they're making their living from a kid's sport. So for them, everything's serious. So for the kids, it's racing, but it's more serious than a normal sport, because the people running the karts or running the engines and the business side are making a living. So they are tough people, and they're tough on the kids. So as a parent, you go, my God, what am I putting them into? It's not a caring environment, probably the opposite. So there's sort of helping people through a trauma. I suppose I am doing that quite a lot. I don't know which the driver is. Maybe the driver's the horse and the rider is a parent, and I'm trying to help them both. I think both of those, the military and your horse whisperer, are very valid.
Well, I mean, and even when you talk about the racing driver and their emotional state, I think I witness it a lot as a fan watching. I really get concerned. Is it immediately after the race, we put the drivers into a media pen and ask them to give us their thought, especially now, I don't know when this will air, the recent controversy with the FIA regarding swearing. Now, I have my personal view regarding language, but I've just sat there and thought, they've had all this run up to the race. They've had qualifying, free practice, all that stuff, and the whole weekend traveling around the globe and doing this week after week. But they sat there for 2 hours approximately in this high intense energy. Adrenaline is pumping through them. And then, especially having read both your book and your brother's book, of just thinking through the racing brain is just different. And then we asked them to put on essentially a show of their emotions, be controlled, be thoughtful. They may have feelings about their competitors at that moment, or their team, their race engineer, whoever. And you're asking them to be thoughtful, when what human in that moment, like again, going back to a military veteran, we don't ask them after they finish a military campaign to immediately come back and have a conversation with the public. They go into their room and debrief with their fellow brothers in arms. And even they may handle their situation with their superiors not wisely, but their superior understands that because they've gone through that. I understand why we do it, because it's part of the sports process of the entertainment side of it. But I feel like we do such a disadvantage to them. And then the pour over is now with the higher level of media scrutiny, social media commentary. I know when I've had a bad day, I don't really want to talk to somebody. So I feel like that when you talk about what you do and how you have to even help them to prepare for those kinds of things.
So you're right. So they do their racing. I don't envy them at all. So all the traveling they do, and then they're constantly interviewed. Then during the race, they've got a microphone like live to the world. Then after the race, they have multiple interviews, and everybody wants a piece of them. Now, there's a pressure on drivers to perform as corporate. They're effectively representing all the businesses who are paying for it all. I don't think a driver, the class of person, like I'm talking about noble, like a kind of an aristocratic, but it's not genetic aristocracy. It's like an aristocracy of the spirit or something, where my driver would be above all that. So the driver would say, look, I'm not doing the interviews. And the team would go, well, that's what pays for the racing. And the driver would say, no, the sponsors I'm bringing are paying for the racing. And I've dealt with them since I was 15, whatever it is. And I'm not doing the interviews. And they'll go, well, that's in the contract. Well, okay, let's forget the contract. I'm gone. To me, the driver should be the person who is running their life. So if you race and you don't want to go into the media pen, then don't go into the media pen. They should be that powerful. I don't like that drivers naturally submit to the idea that they're a corporate toy or a representative of big brands. I don't believe they have to be, but they've submitted to that as a cultural demand. Otherwise, they won't get picked up by whichever academy or process that they have to adhere to. So my ambition for drivers is that they immunise themselves from that by not selling out to that early on. It goes back to that kind of Father Christmas idea. idea that drivers get picked up. Well, what happens is they get picked up, but in that process, they get owned and they're taught to be very, very grateful. And they're kind of threatened all the way. So they're always being threatened with being dropped. Well, you can see it even the ones who have made it. So it could be Tsunoda versus Perez versus Daniel Ricciardo. And there's Red Bull kind of playing mind games with each one saying, well, you better perform. Perez he doesn't perform, but he does say, well, I'm bringing Carlos Slim to your equation. You're going to keep telling me this stuff? That seems to be the game he's playing, which he seems to have won. Not necessarily to his credit, because he's not impressing anyone with his driving. However, he seems to be more powerful than people understand. Otherwise, he just wouldn't be there. But the other drivers around, like that's someone else's power. And I think he was identified as a Mexican talent. But I'm not comfortable with any of it at all. I don't like the drivers that are owned and they're treated like, well, here it's like soccer players who get bought and sold by teams like a commodity. They actually there's a special dispensation for sports where players are bought and sold because it's really against the Human Rights Act. You can't buy a human, but you can in sport. And drivers are treated like that. Now, to me, a driver should not allow themselves to be treated like that. But the culture in the sport is that their ambition is to get into a program that owns them. And then they don't have to worry about the non-driving stuff, which I think is a mistake.
Well, I was going to say, I think what I hear you say is most people tend to look at, or even I've heard it, that racers are more like gladiators. And if we think about what gladiators experienced, it is very close to what you just said, of that they're a commodity, they're disposable, and the ideal, and I mean, I guess because the recent Gladiator 2 just came out, maybe that's why it's in my head, a gladiator's only way of freedom is reaching to the pinnacle and purchasing their own power back. While a knight, as you said, is a honored class that has a role, is skilled like a samurai in Japan even, right? They're the equivalent of that, and respected for their ability of what they're able to do, but they're also a sword for hire and seen as a professional. And as a result, they maintain some power in the dynamic of how they're inside that industry. It seems like that's how your philosophical viewpoint of racing. Am I right?
Yeah, that drivers shouldn't be like gladiators, because obviously the word, you say the gladiators, people think, well, that's cool. It's kind of not if you were a gladiator.
Correct.
But you're right to say there's one or two. So maybe Hamilton has got himself to a position where he is more powerful, but he still has to toe the line. Perhaps Schumacher was able to kind of take over Ferrari. They needed him because he made himself. He kind of re-motivated the team around him. So he had more power, but still they've sort of manipulated. So Knights of the Realm kind of is more appropriate. Samurais, yeah, as long as you're the lead one. But I think it's something that they get tricked into very young. It's just kind of very hard for people to look at someone like. So I look at any of the drivers, the Formula One drivers currently, I look at and think, do I want to produce or help someone become that? And the answer is no for me, because they're not like a sovereign individual working the world around them. They're mostly owned. I don't like it. Like sort of like the gladiator where you buy your way out. Yes. So a driver like Hamilton can start to wield some power. Still, he's not completely free of that system. And most of them are way below him in terms of their own destiny. They're like chess pieces in someone else's game. And that tends to be very rich individuals. The way I explain it to parents is, if you're really rich, you see people with toy dogs, or some like to have racehorses, some like to have amazing cars, but the ultimate toy for someone who's really, really wealthy is their own pet racing driver. That's kind of like, when you get people to understand it in that way, they do sort of understand, but they still, if Alpine comes knocking and says, we're going to take care of your kid, the weight off their shoulders is so phenomenal that they do go and sign, and they go into that program. And then I have to say, well, don't depend on it, because if and when if you get dropped, if they go out of business, you can't just be dropped into nothing. You're going to have to carry on your own independent bringing in. And if they don't allow you to bring in your own sponsors and things like that, then ask the question, why? What am I supposed to do if this goes wrong? They generally want you to feel so privileged with being chosen that you shouldn't even be thinking along those lines. But I think it's very precarious, and it sounds like I feel sorry for for drivers that they're all wildly privileged and lucky. It's not that. It's that they're not becoming the kind of example humans that I'd really want them to be. According to the potential, I believe, is in someone who can survive the racing world and be a brave, heroic person, which they are. The closest, I suppose, is Verstappen. Verstappen is quite wild, isn't he? He's a bit untamable. Like Red Bull have obviously had problems trying to remain in control of him. He sort of did a bit of a hostile takeover, I think, when he started to refuse to follow the orders in car. So, but still, he can't say what he wants. I think I would really be impressed if he did say, "I've had enough. I'm done with racing. I've done what I wanted to do. I'm off to do something bigger." I think that would be cool. That's the test for him. Will he walk?
Yeah, like as I listen to you, I keep thinking a successful racing driver has to be all in, but at the same time hold it with a loose hand of I'm also willing to just let it go and say that whatever I've invested in is transferable to real life skills and bettering me as a human, which is a very delicate balance that you're constantly having to navigate when you consider all the other factors. And especially when we highlight the fact that most of these decisions are happening now at such a young age. Does a child have that? Does the family understand that? Which I think is why it's so valuable to have such a candid conversation with you. I hope that anybody listening to this who's contemplating in their child or someone they love who is looking at racing to think through some of these things early on in the process, to contact you to really realize what you're signing up for, because you have the ability to help someone realize their potential in such an amazing, unique way. But you have to be aware of the other side, the other elements that are going to pull and push onto them. And it's the responsibility of those within the sport network or those advancing the cause to really be wise to that. You brought up Max as someone that you think maybe hits that note. Is there anybody else in the past, even like when the culture was different, or do you think this has always been a part of motorsport culture?
Yeah, I think drivers were more independent. That was a different dynamic. Like they could go and race where they wanted to. If you raced for F1, you could go and do some Can-Am races when the season was done here. A lot of the F1 drivers did that and made a few extra quid. Now they're paid ridiculously well, so they don't need to earn more money. But I'm pretty sure Max Verstappen would want to do other racing. But I think there's probably too many Grand Prix. Probably to the detriment of other parts of the sport. F1 seems to be competing with its own ladder series and other parts of racing. They're trying to own the whole thing. I guess that's what they have to do these days. It's a modern business. But I think that it's now become a corporate thing, whereas racing drivers before were allowed to be a bit more wild. They were kind of dangerous people going out, living kind of a wild existence. If you were racing Can-Am 1,000 horsepower cars in America to earn some money and then going back and racing in Europe, yeah, maybe they were more like that. But now I think the opportunity with drivers now is, which you brought up earlier, is they have to go all in on racing. So you can't be a James Hunt kind of playboy guy smoking and drinking. That's not really an option. I think that's quite cool to have to really go all in, fully dedicate to something. That's when I'm coaching drivers, and the technique and the skills, the precision they need, the concentration they need, the natural feel for driving that you're trying to develop with braking and steering inputs and all these other technical stuff I go into. That is about going all in on your chosen activity. That's like the passion for driving. And the value in that skill acquisition is about dedicating yourself to something. And it being, you don't just give your time to it. It's risky. And especially if you understand and sense the fear of racing, but you do it anyway and you leave it all out on the track. It's kind of a bit of a cliche thing where I'm asking drivers to give all of themselves when they race. That's more so now than in the 60s and 70s, when probably racing was a bit cooler and more dangerous. But now the drivers have to be completely committed. I think that's cool. I like that. But when they are, I'm trying to help them keep hold of their self-ownership, because the racing world, and it only applies to so few drivers, but it is the highest profile part is Formula One. To own yourself, and no one does it. No one's done this, what I'm talking. There's no example of a driver who owns themselves because they get bought so early. And I think the world is too easy on Formula One types of people. So I used to work with a place, used to meet quite a few F1 types. So I worked in the centre, and the chap who brought me in was a Formula One guy he started Tolman F1, Alex Hawkridge. Formula One people are extreme people. He's just incredible. But when you meet lots of them, you get to understand that it's a shark pen. men. They're completely ruthless and they don't want to cede power. So drivers do have the power, really, because they're the attraction. So what you want to do with drivers as a power person is get them to submit really early. So you don't have to deal with them being self-determining, because when they are self-determining, you lose influence. So that's their game. And they play that well because they've got the years of experience. Drivers tend to have zero experience. When an F1 team calls you like out of the blue and says, we're interested in bringing you into our academy, they have all the power. The drivers feel so just elated, and so do the families, that they immediately concede everything because it's such an unbalanced equation. So my dream is for, if an F1 team calls any one of my current crop drivers, I'd be totally understanding if they just went, oh God, yeah, just, own me. I'm yours. That's it. Brilliant. But if a driver of mine said, yeah, but what's in it for me? An F1 academy would be so shocked. What do you mean, what's in it for you? We're rescuing you from oblivion. Drivers should feel valuable enough to say, no, I'm going to be the best thing that's ever happened to your academy. So if you think I'm paying to be involved, we've got another thing coming. If we're going to talk about things, let's get a few things straight beforehand. That's where I think that, I'm not saying academies shouldn't exist, training programs and all that stuff, or contracts, but I would, if drivers are going to get sucked into that world, I want them to go in armed to the teeth, because they're going in with sharks. They're going into a very unbalanced, and the F1 people are so used to everyone rolling over in front of them because that's their life. That's just the normal daily reality for them. If you're someone known in F1, or if you're a scout, there is such a thing, but they do call themselves scouts. Everybody just falls at their feet, and they're not used to people going, well, big deal. So what? I'll speak to everyone. I'm not just going to speak to you. You're not just going to sign me up. Drivers don't currently have that. I've got one or two who have got the potential for that. So aside from driving, there's a lot of very, very, very fast, skillful drivers. There's an oversupply of them. There's hundreds of winners. Every race, every weekend has a winner. There's very few drivers who have got the extra bit of personal self-worth or something about their character that's a bit stronger. Now, if they don't have that, I'll try and help them find it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's some who do have that, and those are the drivers I feel have potential to actually do a lot more within racing and get more from it. I've got one at the minute who, he's the first one who I've asked, 13 years old, right, now you're going to have to start getting sponsors. So where your dad's industrial estate is area, go to some of the businesses and physically knock the door and introduce yourself like business. He did that, and the people answering the door were so shocked that within an hour he had the director and another executive, I think it was the finance executive, coming round to see him, and they spent an hour. They said, we've never seen anything like that. He only knocked on the door because no kids want to do that. The world is so on your phone, send an email. So the opportunity is vast. Like, it's massive because nobody else is going to do it. I'll give him a shout out. It's Oliver Meek. So he's a kid who's plenty of skill for drive, but he has another angle to him that allows him to really use motorsport to develop himself, because he will do stuff like that. So he will go and speak to people, and they're so surprised, they immediately drive in, they're bowled over. A racing driver's just come up to us and said hello, telling us all about his racing, but they're amazed. It's like a proof of concept for me, where as soon as that's there, I know that people do love racing drivers when they act like a racing driver. To see a young lad have the guts to bang your door cold. Now, who answered the door was a young woman, right? So for a young teenage boy to knock a door, and what, I think she's in like her 20s, opens a door, like, it'd normally run away. But he stuck at it. I gave him a little like pep talk, which would be yourself. You're cool. You're a racing driver. Just tell them what you do, introduce yourself, and they will remember you. That's all you need for the first step. So he acted like a racing driver, and everybody around was like, oh my God, wow. So that's the impact you can have. And then hopefully as time goes on, if there's momentum in that direction, if he wants to be a professional, he may have his own backers, which means he has the negotiating power. And that's a different equation. But then what you learn from that, I mean, like a 13-year-old is learning how to sell themselves. I've got another driver, she's now doing media, called Amelia Nelson. She's a great example of where her dad, the best thing he ever did was say, we can't afford to do this, and you're going to have to find something to pay. She's a similar age at the time. She was like 14, I think. So the way I met her was because she went out and she spoke to like a local entrepreneur who said, here's some advice. And she took the advice, and she found herself a number of local companies companies that paid for her to race for a year. And part of it was the local in her area, a trust, said, right, we'll pay for some coaching. And that's how I met her. She's an excellent driver, but she stands out because I think she's the only driver I've met who completely independently at that age was able to bring in enough money to go racing for a year. So it does happen.
It's incredibly impressive.
And it's not, and that was not, none of this is, most sponsorship for drivers who are young is through their parents have got a supplier and they've kind of twisted their arm and said, you know, do a little bit of a tax write-off, sponsor the kid, and then we'll get a deal somewhere else and that sort of stuff. These are real, genuine people have been sold on a story. I mean, Ollie just going and banging on someone's door was like a moment for his dad of like, well, what am I witnessing? So it's there. That's what racing does. So you've got the personality of a driver, the character, although they're generally drivers they don't want to speak to anyone. They just want to drive. But when they apply their own driving character to a situation, they shine. And then they're learning how to be a business person aged 13 or whatever their age is. If you could sell yourself as a driver, what can't you sell? The toughest sell there is. Give me some money because I want it. What for? Yeah, I want to burn it.
Exactly.
Waste.
Exactly.
Yeah, what can't you sell then? So you're selling, it's just an incredible, like that's the most enriching thing I can imagine. You're a race, you can race, you can fund it yourself, you can do the best thing in the world, also the hardest thing in the world, and learn how to take nothing and turn it into money just by being you.
Amazing.
But yeah, it does happen. So it does sound like I'm kind of pie in the sky. I am almost pie in the sky because it's so rare for drivers to actually swallow the pill and do it.
Yeah.
But
you know, what it strikes me is that really what you're doing, and we're getting to the point here where we need to wrap this thing, but I think in the nutshell, what you're doing is you're actually creating truly professional racing drivers at a very young age. That's what you're really doing.
Yeah.
And to me, that's an amazing value prop. If I was a parent and I was sitting down with you and hearing what you were going to say, I don't think that any parent worth their salt wouldn't at least pay attention to you and say, yeah, I love where you're going. You're my guy. I mean, that's the way I would look at it.
yeah, they generally do. They generally agree.
Yep.
However, when the rubber meets the road,
Mm-hmm.
it's so hard
Oh, yeah.
to do it. That
Yeah.
keeping the faith. It's kind of the point of it is you've got to keep faith in something when the world is really just trying to, the racing world, I'm like one, like this one voice, and there's everybody else is saying, no, that's just nonsense.
Yep.
Nobody gets sponsored. Just forget that.
Yeah, I mean, especially your approach, I think is so valid and thought out. I really like, you've given us so much information, Terence, to process and think through. It definitely went in a direction that I hadn't expected, but I've loved it. If anything, yes, I'd love to have you back on to have deeper conversations about the art of racing and the way that you coach, because I think it will be helpful to people to hear that and really to think through the different layers of this. I know that our time is actually fleeting. I want to wrap us up today, but Terence, can we have you on in the future?
Of course, yeah.
Okay, we would love that. Okay,
Yes.
So on that note, I thank you so much, Terence, for your time, for your thoughts, and we look forward to a future conversation.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure. Thanks for getting it.
Oh, totally my pleasure, Terence. This has been wonderful.
Okay, friends, what did you think of our conversation? Drop me a line via email, sabrina@2guysagirlandf1.com. Can you help us out? If you haven't already, please take a moment to follow us and give us 5 stars on your favorite podcast app, as well as share this episode with other F1 fans. We know our growth is because of you, and the guys and I thank you. And with that, let me say, we'll keep talking and you can keep listening in because we're just 2 guys, a girl, and F1. For John, Dick, and me, Sabrina, thanks for listening.